So this comment led to this quiz, which led to this video. Over the next 20 minutes, I will walk you through this plant shop sketch. I'll talk about my process and why I made some of the decisions that I did. By the end of this video, you'll be drawing scenes like this so easily, but the goal here is for you to develop your own style. So learn from me, steal from me, and apply it to your own sketches. Whenever you start a sketch, you want to try to be as loose with the pen as possible. Now I fully get it, this is not easy, and it takes some practice. If you've watched my other videos, you'll know that I like to start with thumbnails, and that is a great exercise for you to do to loosen up. There's so many things that can get in the way of looseness. The first is how your pen interacts with the paper. Does your pen have enough ink? Is your paper smooth? Is your wrist stiff? These are all real things that get in the way of you being free with your sketching. Let's talk about pens for a second. The one I'm using in this sketch is a white Y Studio one. It's their resin fountain pen, and it's a beautiful pen. It's great to write with, but I don't know how great it is to draw with. The nib on this model is thin, and you can see in the sketch that I have to go back and forth to get the lines to show. It's a great pen to get the initial sketch down, but it may not be the best to reinforce the lines. I'd recommend a pen with a thicker nib or fine liner. That way you can really get those thick shadow lines. Drawing people is very tricky. Getting proportions right is tough when you're sketching loosely. I try to break it up into 3 segments: the head, the torso, and the legs. If you take that approach, the proportions come a little bit easier. Try to be extra loose here. It really adds to the energy that the people bring to the sketches. If you notice, when it comes to the building, I try to draw one line at a time, or one shape at a time. I make sure not to sketch perfectly straight, because that will pull away from the character of the building. Now is a great time to switch to my markers. You don't want to get too detailed initially with the pen. You just want to lay down the basic outlines and get your composition right. Whatever media you're using for color is where you lay down the tones for your scene and really bring it to life. I like to use alcohol markers. They're just like watercolor, but a lot more predictable, which is something you want when you're starting out. Windows are the life of my sketches. It's no secret that most of my sketches are from photographs that I take. When I'm walking around the streets of Toronto, I look for storefronts that catch my eye. And 9 out of 10 times, it's because of the window display. It really pulls me in. It took me a while to figure out how to sketch that energy that got my attention in the first place. Here's the secret. You use the colors, not the lines or the pens. It's not the details that matter. It's the thick bits of color. What you want to do is to use your markers to create the impression of the window display. You want to allude to what's behind the glass without drawing every detail. One tip when you're using markers, and this goes for watercolor also, you want to start with your lightest shade and layer on your shadows. With traditional painting, you start with your midtones and add in your shadows, then finally your highlights. With markers, you do the exact opposite. And that's why it's a tricky medium. You have to start with your highlights, and then you add your midtones, and then finally your shadows. But there's a trick to make those highlights pop, and I'll get into that later on. Now that you've laid down your impressions of the buildings, and more importantly, the window displays using the markers, now it is the time to bring it to life with the pen. When adding the outlines and the details, try not to draw every line. Don't even draw full lines, just add a stroke here and a dab there. If you add too many lines, you will lose that sense of depth and your whole display will look flat. Markers are fun because they're really versatile and you can do a lot with them. These alcohol markers layer on really well. Once your initial layer has dried, you can go back in with the same color and the same shade and it'll add a little bit of extra depth. I'm just adding the same orange as I did before. This is where the depth comes from. It adds impressions rather than details. For the longest, I was afraid to use the black marker. It's permanent and you can't layer over it with any other color. But the secret here is to only use it as an accent. Only use it for those areas that are deep shadows. That way, it complements your sketch rather than overpowers it. I'm only using it here to add an extra bit of contrast to separate the windows and the rails from the building. Remember what I said before about letting your markers dry and coming back later to layer? That's how you do bricks. If you've ever tried to use this technique for bricks while the base is still wet, the darker gray will just blend right in and it will look like smudges. And just like before, when I used the pen to add small details into the window, I'm doing the same for the bricks. Remember, don't draw full lines. You want to give the impression of bricks, not draw each individual one. I want to show you one last thing before I get into the highlighting technique I told you about before. If not treated with care, attempting to draw backgrounds can completely ruin your sketch. I recommend using just simple colors with broad strokes to separate your page from your sketch. Adding details will just pull attention away from your subject. These acrylic pens are your highlighting cheat code. That's the secret. Just like pen work, you want the highlights to come in sparingly. You don't want to draw full, thick lines. You just want to add the impressions of the light, just a glimmer. Acrylics are how you bring your sketch fully to life. It adds that finishing quality. Here's a quick recap of what we talked about. You want to be loose from the very beginning. So draw thumbnails to warm up. Use your pen to draw basic shapes and outlines of your subject. Don't go straight into detail. Markers are where you add the emotion to your sketch. Use broad strokes and thick colors just to create the energy of your subject. Use your pen to bring in those details, but don't overdo it. A black marker or a thick fine liner is a great way to add shadows and accent, but remember to use them sparingly. Use the white acrylic to add those bits of final highlights to bring your sketch to life. I hope you got some good tips in there. If you keep practicing, you'll be sketching like this in no time.